All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. It's our great pleasure to have Jim McClelland today with us as our speaker in the leadership series. Jim has a long and distinguished career, including Goodwill Industries, where he served as president and CEO for many, many years. And after his retirement, he was asked by the governor, Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb, to lead the state's response to the opioid crisis. So he spent several years there, continuing his great impact in the public sector. So just to make sure we give enough time to Jim, I'm going to keep his introduction short and turn the stage over to him. Please join me in a warm welcome to Jim McClelland. Okay, so Jim, the stage is yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Pinar. I really appreciate the introduction. I like short introductions, by the way, but it's really great to be back here on campus. For those who haven't heard me talk before, I'm going to say something here that I have usually said to groups at Georgia Tech, that if when I graduated from Georgia Tech a long time ago, anyone had told me that I would spend 45 of the next 50 years working for Goodwill Industries, I would have considered them totally delusional. Most successful careers are not planned. Mine certainly wasn't, but I was extraordinarily fortunate to find at a relatively early age, 26, what turned out, for me at least, to be a nearly ideal fit for someone with my value system and whatever abilities I might have. But my path was certainly not conventional. I'm a fifth-generation Floridian. I grew up in Central Florida, middle-class family. In high school, I had several leadership positions, but including president of my class my junior year. And I enjoyed being in those positions. But after high school, I never sought any of the paid or volunteer leadership positions that I eventually held. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. I was 13 years old when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite into space. And I can still remember how shocked I was at age 13 that the U.S. was behind in the space race. There was a Cold War going on in those years between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. We were all very much aware of it. And following the launch of Sputnik, there was a huge push in this country for more engineers. And I was pretty good in math and science, and I said, okay, I'm going to become an engineer, and I'm going to help. And a couple of years later, I decided I was going to go to Georgia Tech, and I didn't even apply anywhere else. Fortunately, I got in. I started out here as an electrical engineering student. I was co-op, partly because I wanted the work experience, and in part because it was an economic necessity. I was a good student, not a great student. And as I got into my early double E courses, my sophomore year, it quickly became apparent to me this was not going to be a good fit. I'd become increasingly interested in industrial engineering, and at the end of my sophomore year, I changed my major, and it might have been the best decision I made during my years at Georgia Tech. I enjoyed my courses my junior and senior year, and a senior project that I did at the Scottish Rite Children's Hospital here in Atlanta gave me a lot of personal satisfaction. Now, when I changed majors, I had to change co-op jobs. And I was fortunate to be able to work for a very fine engineering consulting company out of their Atlanta office. What I most remember about that, though, is that I was pretty good at the work, but I wasn't at all sure that that was anything that I was going to want to do long term. Now, when I graduated, there might have been a Cold War going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, but there was a hot war going on in Southeast Asia. And the military buildup, the U.S. military buildup in Vietnam was going full speed. And nearly all of us had an obligation to serve in some way. I was fortunate to be able to fulfill my obligation by serving 3 years in a quasi-military organization that honestly I never would have heard of had they not interviewed here on the Georgia Tech campus. I served a year and a half aboard ships, one in the Atlantic and one in the Pacific. But my primary assignment on that second ship was something that was highly technical. It was something I was in no way trained for and consequently did not perform well. And after several months, I was transferred to a desk job in Washington, D.C., where I finished out my 3 years of service. Now, again, similar to the second co-op job that I had, I was pretty good at the work. But as far as a career was concerned, I knew it was just marking time. Outside work, though, I had some experiences during that year and a half in Washington, D.C. that literally changed the course of my life. I attended a church in downtown Washington that was heavily involved in community service. They had a tutoring program one evening a week for kids who lived in some of the low-income areas of the city, and they needed tutors. So I volunteered, and I tutored two boys, 13 and 14 years of age, one-on-one, mostly in math and English. And the church also had a program on Saturday mornings for children who had disabilities, and they needed drivers. So I volunteered. Yeah, I'm young, single, got a lot of free time. I volunteered every Saturday morning. I would go to the homes of some of these cute little kids and pick them up, take them to the church. 2 hours later, I'd take them home. I got more satisfaction from those volunteer experiences than from anything I had done to that point in my life. And I started wondering if there might be a place where I could use my industrial engineering skills, get a similar kind of satisfaction, get paid for it. Now, I want to emphasize that at that point in my life, I did not aspire to be a leader. I did aspire to serve. Throughout my adult life, I've never been interested in having power or control for its own sake, but I've always been interested in accomplishing something worthwhile and in creating something good that might outlast me. So I started calling organizations, not-for-profit organizations primarily, that were headquartered in the Washington area. Described my background, said, do you have jobs for people like me? Most of them didn't have any idea what I was talking about. The exception was Goodwill's national office. And they asked me to come in and talk. So I did. And then they asked me to come back for another interview. And then they asked me to take a battery of tests. And then they started talking to me about going into a 2-year on-the-job executive training program that would be conducted at a local Goodwill somewhere, after which I would be eligible to be considered to become the CEO of one of the 160 plus independent, locally governed and managed Goodwill organizations in the U.S. And I pushed back. I said, I don't want to be an executive. You know, I'm an industrial engineer. I can help you with plant layout and design, workflow, materials handling. These are the kinds of things I know something about. But they persisted, and I procrastinated. And this dance went on for about 6 months. Until finally I said, I'm going to do it. I turned down 2 other job offers I had at the time, each of which would have paid me 40% more than Goodwill. And I took a 25% pay cut from what I was currently making. And I made a commitment to work for Goodwill for 4 years in some capacity. I moved to Houston to enter the executive training program under the tutelage of the CEO of that organization. And I quickly learned that in that situation, at least, the executive program, training program could probably best be described as sink or swim. Within a month, I was put into a senior leadership role in that organization, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I did learn quickly on the job, and a little over a year later, my boss sent me to Beaumont, which was 90 miles from Houston, where he had a branch that he had started a few years earlier, and it had a lot of problems. He was tired of it. His orders to me were to improve it enough that it could become an independent Goodwill organization, separate from the Houston organization, within a year. And we did it in 9 months, during which he came over only once, and he stayed for 15 minutes. I was really on my own at that time. But Beaumont is where I first realized that I really enjoyed running an organization and making it better. And I loved the sense of accomplishment from being able to make things happen that created opportunities for people who in many cases had not been dealt much of a hand in life. And I also found that my values and some of the historic values of Goodwill seem to align pretty well. I'll paraphrase three of those for you. The first is that every individual has value. Second, that work is a good thing. It adds meaning and purpose to life. And Goodwill provides opportunities, not charity, and fosters development, not dependency. Well, a few months after we became independent from the Houston organization, I got a call from the CEO of the Indianapolis-based Goodwill. Now, he had become a friend. I had a lot of respect for him, and he had just found out that he had cancer. This number two person had just left to go run a Goodwill in another city, and Alan needed help. And he asked me if I would move to Indianapolis, become vice president operations of that organization. I would tell you I had zero interest in living in the Midwest. I'm fifth generation Floridian after all. But I thought, if I'm going to make a career out of this, I probably should go. I knew that the Indianapolis-based organization was already one of the largest and one of the better Goodwills in the country, and if nothing else, I'm going to learn a lot. And so I did. I accepted the offer, and I moved to Indianapolis, and I made a commitment to work for that organization for a minimum of 3 years. Now, that was the third multi-year commitment that I had made since I left Georgia Tech. And after a lot of experiences, I eventually came to the conclusion that the greatest accomplishments and life's greatest rewards come from making and keeping long-term commitments. Well, sadly, 7 months after I got there, my friend and CEO, Alan, died. He was only 36 years old. The board named me interim director, and 2 months later, they named me the new president and CEO. I was 30 years old. Fortunately, I suppose, I had no idea how little I knew relative to what I needed to know. And had a lot of confidence, though, warranted or not, and I had a lot of ideas. And the next 41 years were near constant learning and growing experience. I learned from books. I learned from visiting other Goodwills that were outperforming us in certain areas. Later, I started learning more from people outside of our, the Goodwill family, if you will. And after a particularly difficult situation in the early 80s during a deep recession, I went back to school and got an MBA. One of the greatest benefits, from my perspective, a personal perspective, of the work that I did was that it gave me opportunities to get to know and work with people at just about every level of society. In cities, small towns, rural areas, and because I had an interest and subsequent involvement in the national and international sides of Goodwill, it gave me opportunities to get to know and work with people in various parts of the country and in other parts of the world. And I loved the variety. And I also came to really appreciate the perspective that those kinds of experiences gave me. And over the years, we tried many different ways to grow our businesses and accomplish our mission. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, but we learned from all of them. Not long before I retired, I identified 104 what I considered to be significant initiatives that we had undertaken during my career. And I classified them in baseball terms. I had no idea how appropriate that might be in this town at this particular time. But out of those 104, and by the way, some of these were totally new ventures or services. Some of them were significant variations on or major extensions of something we were already doing, and others were major process changes. But I classified them in baseball terms, and we had 10 home runs, 8 with bases loaded. We had 18 strikeouts. We had a lot of singles and a few doubles. But the impact of those 8 Grand Slam home runs far exceeded the net cumulative impact of everything else we did. And over the years, we generally adapted reasonably well to the incredible changes that were taking place around us in the world that we operated in. And eventually we evolved into something that I had not even imagined. And now I've touched on what really turned out to be our formula for organizational evolution. You try things, you learn, you adapt, you do these things, you evolve. And the impact of the work that we were doing was particularly strong during the last 10 years before I retired. And it made that part of my career by far the most enjoyable and rewarding. So what prompted that? Well, in 2004, we opened a charter high school for a high poverty, high special needs population of students. And I would tell you, that's without question the most difficult initiative I was ever involved in. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We started a high school. There's more. Wait, there's more. So this was a public charter high school. It turned out to be the catalyst for an incredible organizational learning experience and a rapid increase in the rate at which the whole organization evolved. From day one, we started coming face to face with problems that we had known existed, but they hadn't been our problems. Now they were. We soon found that if we didn't help some of those kids deal with some of the stuff they were encountering outside of class, they weren't going to be in class. And so we started wrapping services around some of those kids and quite often members of their families. And 4 years into this, we trying to understand better what we were dealing with. I hired a young man, incredibly bright kid, right out of Wake Forest. And I asked him to do some research into the links between poverty, low education levels, crime rates, and we eventually added to that list a whole host of health issues. And Eric soon came back with an enormous amount of data showing how so many of these problems tend to be interrelated, and they often reinforce and compound each other. But if you look at the way we have tended to treat them as a society, we don't treat them that way. We treat them in isolation, one from the other. The public sector has a tendency to do this through large bureaucratic silos that frequently don't communicate effectively with each other, while the not-for-profit sector is incredibly fragmented. A lot of organizations doing a lot of really good work, but each one typically focused on one problem or issue, one target population, or one tiny geographic area in many cases. Each typically is working on just a piece of a larger, more complex set of issues, and we have not been very good at connecting the pieces. So we're looking at all of this, and we're starting to ask ourselves more questions. What do we do with what we're learning? How can we have the greatest impact in the lives of people and the communities where we operate? And is there a way that we can add unique value, something that isn't there already? And that process and a lot of learning led to the development of the Excel Center. Now, the Excel Center is also a public charter high school, but it is designed for older youth and adults who have previously dropped out. We opened the first one in 2010 with 300 students. 6 months later, with no advertising, we had 2,000 people on the waiting list. We tweaked the model. We made a lot of changes the first year, but because of the demand, we started opening more schools. And by the time I retired 5 years later, we were operating 12 of them in Indiana. Well, the growth has continued subsequent to that, and partly through licensing arrangements. There are now 31 Excel centers across 5 states and the District of Columbia, and more scheduled to open soon. I think the next ones are going to be in Louisville and Phoenix. It's an incredibly successful model. Now, a year after we opened the first one, we brought to Indiana an organization called Nurse Family Partnership. Now, Nurse Family Partnership is a home. It's a home visitation program for first-time moms in low-income households. It was created in Colorado back in the 1970s. It's been researched. A number of randomized control trials have been done of it over the years that show incredible, sustained, long-term impact. And it was in 30 some odd states, but Indiana wasn't one of them. We thought, boy, our state really needs this. Is there a way we can help bring it to Indiana? We worked for 3 years, working mostly with the State Department of Health, and we found a way to bring it to Indiana. And then the State Department of Health asked us to run it. That wasn't my idea, but we said, okay, we'll do it if that's what we need to do to get it to the state. And soon after we started running it, we started seeing the opportunities for some incredible synergies with some of what we were already doing. For example, the median age of these young moms was 21. Many of them did not have a high school diploma. We can link them with education opportunities through the Excel centers. We can link them with employment services such as we have been providing for years. We can link them with other services that are provided by other organizations that we have relationships with. And with a navigator in the middle that we call a Goodwill guide, the guides could help connect these services. They could make sure that everything is coherent. They can provide continuity in the relationship between those who are receiving services and those who are providing services. And this, to me, this approach is what we need to be doing a lot more of if we're ever going to be reducing some of these significant social problems and really starting to reduce multi-generational poverty in this country. Well, 3 of the keys to what we were able to do, I'm just going to touch on these briefly. A board of directors that gave us the freedom, not only gave us the freedom to try a lot of different ways to grow our mission, to grow our businesses and accomplish our mission, they also gave us the freedom to fail at some of what we tried and learn and grow from the experiences. Second key, our leadership team. A lot of smart, talented people who brought to the organization not just their knowledge and skills, but also a strong commitment to the mission. In other words, they brought their heads and their hearts. Now, I will tell you that the strong leadership team that we had during the latter part of my career, it really started developing after, from a personal standpoint, perhaps the most difficult situation that I encountered during my career, and that was when I woke up one beautiful spring morning when I was 43 years old having a heart attack. Now, the organization did okay as I was recovering, but during that recovery period, I resolved that I was going to build a team that would be so strong that they could run the organization really well for 6 months or more in case I died or was otherwise unable to function. And I started going after a higher level of talent. And I was able to find people who were willing to come to work for us and stay for, in many cases, long periods of time. All of the people that we brought into that team, all of them could do their jobs far better than I could have ever done their jobs. I was really happy to let them do that too, because it gave me more time to spend on long range and strategic issues and initiatives, the new initiatives. And frankly, for me, that was a lot more fun anyway than running day-to-day operations. And part of what enabled us to attract and keep an awful lot of really, really talented people was our culture. And we built that culture during the last half of my career around what we called 5 basic principles that we applied in every part of the organization at all levels. The first of these was respect for people, striving to treat everyone in a respectful manner, and it went all directions, up, down, laterally, with people inside the organization, with people outside the organization. You violate that, by the way, depending on how bad it was, you might get a second chance. You probably would not get a third. We did not tolerate it. Customer satisfaction, striving to meet or exceed the expectations that customers, donors, and users of our services have of us. Informed decision-making, gathering relevant information as much as possible, making decisions based on facts. Innovation and improvement, just continuously seeking better ways to grow, improve, and increase our impact. And finally, good stewardship, being responsible stewards of all of our resources. We found we incorporated those principles, by the way, into our recruitment and hiring, onboarding and performance development review processes, and we found it was a lot easier to manage according to a small number of values and basic principles than it was a thick book of rules and regulations. We had to have some of those, but we tried to keep them to a minimum. And when I retired, almost a little over 6 years ago now, the board named the person who had been our chief operating officer for the previous 2 years, but he had been with the organization a total of 13 years, named him the new CEO. And I would tell you that one of the things I am most proud of is how well the organization has done since I retired. They've had a lot of growth. They've taken services such as the Excel Centers and Nurse Family Partnership into other parts of the state. But the national network of Excel Centers is growing rapidly, and the organization itself is up to over 4,000 employees now. They're just doing a tremendous job, and I'm so pleased at that. So what advice can I leave with you? I would just suggest to you what I used to tell people who would come to me for some career advice, whether they were just starting out or they wanted to change careers, but in an effort to get more personal satisfaction from what they were doing for a living. And I would tell all of them, look first for a good values fit. Your values and those of an organization don't have to be identical, but they better be compatible, or you're going to have problems. Look for a place where you can use your abilities to a substantial degree, or you're going to be frustrated. Look for a place where you can learn and grow. That's never been more important than it is today. And finally, look for a place where you think you're likely to enjoy the people you're working with. I mean, after all, you might be spending half your waking hours with them. And I would also ask you to consider Albert Schweitzer's belief that the only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. You can find opportunities to serve in any of the sectors. Thanks so much for listening. I wish you all lives full of meaningful and rewarding experiences.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This will end the recorded part of our webinar. Please reach out to us if you would like to follow up. Thank you.